November 7th, anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, and 20 years from the fall of the Berlin Wall. Russia's got a deep history, I think everyone realizes, over 1,000 years, and multicultural society spanning over 11 time zones. And also is an important strategic partner for a lot of cooperation, whether it's terrorism or non-proliferation, or economic, dealing with economic crisis. Today we're going to explore, we have an outstanding panel, explore the transformation of Russian society and socioeconomic models emerging since the fall of communism.
Well, we do not currently have a conflict between the United States, I'm a US citizen, and Russia. But still we have to make effort to prevent future conflicts. And still I would say there are some relics of the past which are still hanging and preventing the better relations between Russia and the United States. And that's a concern of my organization, Russia-America Goodwill Association. People trying to better relations between the two countries. Well, the relics of the Cold War. Because I'm an American citizen, I'll probably focus mostly on I'll have gripes with the US government. So those are. Well, there is a kind of anniversary too. 50 years since President Eisenhower signed into law the congressional resolution Captive Nations Week. So that's one of the major obstacles to better relations. It's still on the books, it's still being proclaimed, including most recently by President Obama. The third week of July is a Captive Nations Week. Well, just a small quote from that resolution of 50 years old. Whereas the imperialistic policies of communist Russia have led through direct and indirect aggression to the subjugation of the national independence of Poland, Hungary, Lithuania, Ukraine, Czechoslovakia, Latvia, Estonia, White Ruthenia, Romania, East Germany, Bulgaria, mainland China, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, North Korea, Albania, Israel, Ural. If you know about that, let me know. Tibet, Kazakhstan, have you heard of that land? Turkestan, have you? North Vietnam, and others. Antiquated language. It's completely out of, if ever it was in place. I understand that people have aspirations for freedom and we express sympathy for them, but to have it as an official document and celebrate, it's certainly, I would say it's a Russophobic anti-Russian document. Keep in mind that Russia itself is excluded. It's not a captive nation. But from the viewpoint of many Russians, Russians are the first and the foremost victims of communism. And here they are portrayed as the chief aggressors. They are spreading the communist way of life. In fact, there is not a single word about what was the ideology which animated the Soviet leaders. Not even Russian leaders, Soviet leaders. Marxist-Leninism, it's not even mentioned here. So it's a completely antiquated document, still on the books, still being celebrated, so to speak. Anniversary, so celebrate anniversary. Well, another relic of the Cold War is the Jackson-Vanik Amendment of 1974. So the first one was 59, President Eisenhower. It's 74, signed into law by President Ford, which requires a free emigration of Jews from the USSR. Antiquated completely, because now Russia and Israel have good relations. As a matter of fact, they have they're not requiring visa anymore. They travel freely back and forth, and many Jews go to Israel, then they return back to Russia. Well, another, just to enumerate, the third obstacle to better relations, of course, it's a failure to dissolve NATO as promised. With the end of communism, with the end of the aggressive Marxist-Leninist ideology, which held its way throughout the world, including in the United States, but especially probably at least until 1968. In France, it was even difficult to retain tenure. I know about that. I was academic field, unless you were Marxist. So that was the global Marxist-Leninist revolutionary movement, and we're still talking about imperialist designs of Russia, of Russian people. So that's also has to go. It's unnecessary. And then after NATO was retained country to its regional stature, then it started expanding. It's first into the Soviet bloc countries, then into countries of the former Soviet Union. Well, again, it's an obstacle to improvement, to improve relations. Then, of course, recognition of Kosovo. It's only triggered some other events, including recognition of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And finally, indirect encouragement of Georgia Saakashvili to attack South Ossetia. Indirect. I do not say that the United States encouraged, but they gave mixed signals, and he jumped the gun, so to speak. Well, I have a couple of personal anniversaries too. So I might say that it's just about 30 years since I had a debate on this very same issues with Professor Richard Pipes, who was about to become National Security Advisor to President Reagan. And I reviewed his writing. I found that his writings were very much anti-Russian. So, for instance, he was saying, quoting, "The elite currently ruling the Soviet Union is, for all practical purposes, directly descended from the peasantry. And for that reason, we should not trust them." He warned Reagan against negotiations or against detente, said only immediate reciprocity, no concessions to that, because you cannot trust Russian leaders. They descended from peasants. Not because he did not even mention the word communist. Now they're not or beholden to communist Leninist ideology, but again, quote, because of persistent tradition of Russian expansionism. That's why we should not trust Russians. And then he says about, quote, "These various elements of historical experience blend to create a very special kind of mentality, which stresses slyness, the peasant slyness, self-interest, reliance on force, skill in exploiting others." I don't know what you call it now. I think after that people call it the ethnic slur or stereotyping or even hate speech. So stereotyping the whole nation because the Soviet leaders cannot be trusted because they mostly stem from Russian peasants. In fact, we are celebrating also the fall of the Berlin Wall. But we often forget that in addition to that Berlin Wall was another one. Because the totalitarian regime, the Soviet regime certainly wanted to control not only space geographically, horizontally, so to speak, but also history vertically. And that's where was another Berlin Wall. It was just as ubiquitous and lasted much longer, 73 years. Its separation of Russia, not only from Europe, from the world, but from its own history. That was eradication of Russian own history. And that's, again, one thing that we often forget, that we focus only on geographic expansion of, presumably, of Russian expansionism, but we forget about communist ideology, which was contrary to the national interest of the Russian people, among all other people. I do not deny that. Let's see, only glasnost came to erase, to some extent, what had been before, including during the Soviet past. Well, just let me say a little test, if I may ask, who was the last Russian Tsar? Could you raise the hand? If someone could know who it is? Not Dodge, I know. Who was the last Russian Tsar? Well, it's a crowd of 70 people here. Nicholas mostly say that, but you say the same question. Well, in fact, it was not. But ask the same question in Russia. Also, maybe only 5 people out of 100 would say, "Well, wait a minute. Nicholas II abdicated in favor of Grand Duke Michael, his brother, and Grand Duke Michael was not the person to be dismissed. He was the one who authorized the Constituent Assembly on the pattern of the United States or maybe the French Revolution. when the people, sovereignty people, assert sovereignty people by universal election. He was the last Tsar in this respect because according to his manifesto, the Russians actually voted. It was the first universal election. Women did not vote yet in most of the country. They did not vote in the United States, not in France, not even in Sweden, but they voted in the universal election in Russia. The Bolsheviks lost. And that's why we don't hear anything about the Grand Duke Michael. So even though he again was one democratic Tsar, so to speak. Well, another question maybe. Do you remember Solzhenitsyn, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Nobel Prize winner? He wrote a letter to Soviet leaders suggesting a course of changes in Russia. What kind of changes? Well, he did it in '73. Then he came to the United States and came to declare his views here. And his prediction, whatever he had to say about the Soviet Union, were totally dismissed. He's antiquated. He's a monarchist. He belongs to the past by American Sovietologists. They just did not believe. Nobody believed the Soviet Union will end. And Solzhenitsyn said, yes, it will. The Russian people will read my books and I will return to Russia. He was totally dismissed. But in that letter, actually, he proposed course of reform, somewhat, one might say, similar to that of China. He said, you Soviet leaders, you can hold your power, your party if you wish, but give up on ideology. It's the most poisonous thing, which poisons relations with all countries. Give up on Marxist-Leninism, throw it out, and do patriotic things. Allow Russians to be promoted, not according to party belongings, whether you know the Communist Manifesto, Das Kapital by Marx, but according to their patriotic feelings. That was not allowed, because Soviet leaders apparently did not even read their letter. Well, if I have a couple of more minutes, I would call your attention to you probably know George Will, the columnist. He used to say, there are more Marxists at Harvard than there are in the whole of the Soviet Union. Some exaggeration, but he was on target because every college in the United States wanted to imitate Harvard. And finally, I call your attention to one article recently, on the 2nd of November in the Washington Post by Paul Hollander, who escaped from Hungary in '56. So he also writes in the Washington Post, the number of documentaries, feature films, or television programs about communist societies is minuscule compared with those on Nazi Germany and Holocaust. And few universities offer courses on the remaining or former communist states. For most Americans, communism and its various incarnations remain an abstraction. So that means we won the victory, so to speak, but we never defeated Marxist ideology, which is still among us.